the small study set up in the former guest bedroom, Laura was checking student papers. The autumn evening painted the room in warm colors, reflecting in the glass of the bookcases. Her gaze slid down the spines of the books, stopping at a picture of great-grandmother Elizabeth in a stage costume. She got up from the table, walked over to the photograph. Elizabeth Campbell, the pride of the family. A young opera singer on the legendary stage of the Metropolitan Opera, 1912. It was then that she was presented with that very ring, a delicate platinum setting with a petal pattern and a flawless 2-carat diamond. As a child, Laura had spent hours listening to stories about her great-grandmother, how the daughter of simple immigrants conquered America's premier opera stage, how she sang for the president, how she managed to keep her ring during the Great Depression, refusing to sell it even in the hardest of times. Some things are priceless not because of their value, but because of the stories they hold, grandmother liked to repeat as little Laura gazed mesmerized at the jewelry. The front door slammed. Mark had returned. There was the sound of keys tossed on the nightstand and a tired sigh. "I'm home," his voice sounded a little muffled. Apparently, he'd already headed for the shower without even looking in on her. Laura adjusted her thin-rimmed glasses and returned to the desk. In 10 years of marriage, she'd gotten used to her husband coming home late. Her job as a broker required a full-time commitment. But lately, something had changed. Mark seemed distant, immersed in his own thoughts. When he came down for dinner, he smelled of fresh cologne. His dark blonde hair, lightly touched with gray at the temples, was still damp. He sat down at the table, smiling absent-mindedly. "How was your day?" Laura set a plate of lasagna in front of him. "Fine. Lots of work with a new client. I'll have to stay at work for the rest of the week," he spoke without lifting his eyes from his plate. "I have a little lecture this Friday at the City Gallery, remember? You promised to come." Mark froze for a second. "I'm sorry, darling. I'm afraid I can't make it. Important meeting with the investors." Laura nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. He'd never missed her appearances before. In fact, he was proud that his wife was a respected art historian whose lectures attracted full houses. After dinner, Mark sat in his office with his laptop. Laura could hear him talking to someone on the phone, softly, almost in a whisper. He'd never lowered his voice during work conversations before. She went back to checking papers. 2 art history classes and a meeting with the gallery curator were due tomorrow. Lately, she'd been deliberately loading herself up with work so she wouldn't have to think about what was going on with their marriage. 10 years ago, they met at the opening of a contemporary art exhibition. Mark went there with friends and was frankly bored until he saw a young woman eagerly explaining the concept of a strange installation to a group of visitors. Her enthusiasm and sincere passion won him over. 6 months later, they were married. The hands of the clock were almost midnight when Mark finally turned off his laptop. Passing by her office, he didn't even stop to say goodnight. But once, when he'd been preparing to propose, he'd spent hours asking Laura about the history of the family ring, marveling at its beauty and story. "Why don't we go out this weekend?" Laura asked when they were already in bed. "We'll see. I don't want to promise anything," he muttered, turning on his side. Laura stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to his breathing. There, in the darkness, she allowed herself for the first time to recognize the obvious something had irreparably changed in their lives. And that change had begun about 3 months ago, when their investment firm had taken on new clients. In the morning, Mark left early, leaving untouched coffee on the kitchen table. Laura went into her office, sat down at her desk. She didn't open the top drawer where the ring box was kept very often, maybe once a month, when she especially wanted to feel connected to family history. "Some things are priceless not because of their value," she whispered, feeling her heart clench with a vague unease. 2 weeks after that anxious night, Laura was preparing for an important lecture on the origins of modernism. She had decided to include some photographs of Elizabeth's great-grandmother in her presentation. Her story perfectly illustrated the cultural changes of the early 20th century. Opening the top drawer of her desk, Laura pulled out an old velvet box. It seemed unusually light. Inside, where the ring would normally have been, there was an empty velvet protrusion. Laura froze for a moment, then methodically checked the other compartments of the box. Empty. She searched the drawer, then the entire table, checked to see if the ring had fallen behind the tabletop. Nothing. The last time she'd definitely seen the ring was 3 weeks ago, when she'd taken it out to show it to a new student with a passion for opera history. That evening, when Mark returned from work, Laura asked him about the ring. He shrugged absent-mindedly. "I have no idea. You know I don't go near your desk. Maybe put it somewhere else." Something in his voice made her wary. Not alarm, not surprise, more like a desire to end the conversation as soon as possible. He was immediately distracted by his phone, quickly typing a message. Lately, Mark had been hiding the phone screen more and more often when she walked by. Where once he might have left his phone in the kitchen or living room, now he always had it with him. A few times she noticed him going out on the balcony to talk, although he used to quietly discuss work matters in front of her. The next day, Laura called the police. "If there were no signs of forced entry in the house, and only one thing is missing, most likely you just put it somewhere else," the duty officer said indifferently. He still accepted the statement but did not leave much hope. That evening, Mark stayed late at work. Laura dialed his office number, just to make sure. "Mr. Reynolds left around 6, the receptionist answered. Laura had never followed her husband before. She'd found it humiliating. But now she opened his day planner, which he had left in the hallway as usual. The entries were sloppy. A few appointments crossed out, some occasionally rescheduled. One was repeated with frightening regularity, meeting with CR on Thursdays. A few days later, Laura stopped by her husband's office with a home-cooked lunch. She used to do this a lot. "Ah, Mrs. Reynolds," the receptionist smiled. "Mark's in a client meeting at the Bluebird Cafe. Ask not to be disturbed." The Bluebird was only 2 blocks away. Laura drove by slowly. Through the large windows, the entire room was visible. Mark wasn't there. At home, she searched the office again, hoping that the ring would somehow miraculously be found. In the course of the search, it turned out that an old photograph of her great-grandmother in a stage costume, the one with the ring on her hand, was also missing. In the evening, Mark returned in a good mood, humming something to himself. "How was the meeting?" Laura asked. "Fine. Signed the contract." He didn't even ask how she knew about the meeting. At night, Laura couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, she felt like a complete stranger in her own home. Something was happening, something wrong, but she couldn't quite grasp the essence of it. The next day, she began to methodically reconstruct the chronology of the last few weeks. She'd read in some detective novel that it was important to record even minor details. Opening a new file on her computer, she began to make a list of all the oddities in her husband's behavior and the approximate date of the ring's disappearance. When the list was complete, Laura stared at the screen. A few things stood out. First, the missing photograph. Who would want it? Second, the regular encounters with the mysterious CR. And third, the fact that Mark, usually so attentive to her worries, seemed completely unconcerned about the disappearance of an important family heirloom. The college fundraiser was an annual event. Laura usually treated such events as a pleasant duty, a chance to socialize with colleagues in an informal setting, to support a good cause. This time she almost refused to attend. The mood was not the right one for small talk. The spacious atrium of the college was decorated with garlands and fresh flowers. Waiters scurried between the guests with trays, and a jazz quartet played on a small stage. Laura stopped at a booth with pictures showing the results of past fundraisers. Laura, darling, I'm so glad you came. The Dean of Faculty, Grace Mitchell, put her arm around her shoulders. We have some terrific lots this year. Check out the gallery. There are pictures from all the past auctions on display. Laura walked slowly along the wall looking at the pictures. A children's hospice, new equipment for the art school, the restoration of the ancient organ in the town church. A photograph from the last auction caught her eye. A young woman with bright red hair posed for the camera showing off some jewelry. Laura slid her gaze farther away, but something made her come back. She felt the ground go from under her feet. In the photograph, the woman was holding a ring that looked painfully familiar, a platinum setting with a petal pattern, the same diamond. The caption under the photo read, "Rachel Clark donates family jewelry to a foundation for children with developmental disabilities." Grace, Laura hurried over to the dean. Who is the woman in the picture? Rachel Clark? Ah, our new charity worker. Grace perked up. She works for the event agency that helped us organize the spring ball. Nice girl, donated a beautiful vintage ring. Said it was a family heirloom, but she thinks things like that should be put to good use. Laura struggled to keep her composure. And when was this auction? 2 weeks ago. The ring found a buyer right away, some collector from the West Coast. By the way, introduce me to your husband. I saw him here recently at a meeting with the Board of Trustees. Mark was here? Laura felt her throat go dry. Yes, about a month ago. He was socializing with our benefactors, a very charming man. The evening turned into endless torture. Laura said hello, smiled, kept the conversation going, but in front of her eyes was a picture of a red-haired woman with her ring. Event agency, meetings with the Board of Trustees. Everything was starting to come together. At home, the first thing she did was open her laptop. A search on the name Rachel Clark and the name of the agency quickly yielded a page on a professional network. A young woman with red hair smiled from her profile picture. Under recent projects was a college spring ball. Laura scrolled down the page to the bottom. Rachel's contacts included a few mutual acquaintances, mostly people in the event management industry, and one name that made her feel cold inside, Mark Reynolds. The front door slammed. Her husband had returned. Laura quickly closed her laptop. She wasn't ready to talk right now. She needed time to think things through. "How was your evening?" asked Mark, peeking into the study. "Normal." She tried to keep her voice steady. "The usual charity event." "Met anyone interesting?" "No." Laura looked him in the eye. "No one special." He nodded and walked out, and she was left sitting in the dark, staring at the closed laptop. Now she knew who KR was from his day planner, and knew where her great-grandmother's ring had gone. What remained was to decide what to do next. The day after the fundraiser, Laura arrived at the college earlier than usual. The morning lectures were always led by Catherine Donovan, a modern art lecturer whose daughter Melissa worked in event management. Catherine found herself in the faculty room with a cup of coffee. When she saw Laura, she waved hello. "Didn't expect to see you so early. How was last night?" Laura took a seat next to her, trying to speak as casually as possible. "You know, met some interesting people there. Turns out the spring ball was organized by the agency where your Melissa works." "Yeah, she's a junior manager there. Although lately she's been thinking about changing jobs, she says the atmosphere there is strange." Catherine sipped her coffee. "Strange? What do you mean?" "Well, you know how it is in small companies. Everyone knows each other. All the personal relationships are out in the open. Melissa told me that one of their top managers is having an affair with a married client. Everyone knows about it, but they pretend it's not happening." Laura felt her heart skip a beat, but forced herself to ask calmly, "Isn't that manager's name Rachel by any chance?" "That's right. The redhead one. Melissa says she's not a bad organizer, but she's a difficult character. One minute she's charming, the next she's abrupt and unpleasant. And her affair with that broker is a legend. He even sends flowers to her office, even though everyone knows he's married. Laura mechanically stirred the cooled coffee. What kind of broker? I don't remember exactly. Mark, I think. Works for some investment firm. Catherine suddenly faltered, glancing at Laura. Oh my God, that's not… Yes, it's my husband, Laura replied quietly. A heavy pause hung. Catherine was rubbing her teaspoon confusedly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have… Maybe it's just a rumor. Melissa could have gotten something wrong. No, that's right. I already know about them. Just gathering information. Laura tried to keep her voice steady. Tell me more about this Rachel. What else does Melissa say? Catherine was quiet for a moment, clearly deciding whether to continue the conversation. Well, she's ambitious, strives to impress important clients, just recently donated some antique ring to a charity auction. Everyone at the agency was talking about it. Why? Because it was weird. Rachel isn't the type to part with valuable things easily. Melissa says she was always complaining about her car loan, yet she gave away expensive jewelry for nothing. Laura nodded, putting the pieces of the mosaic together. And when did their affair with Mark start? Do you know? About 3 months ago. He came to a meeting about organizing a corporate event. Rachel immediately took the project for herself. And then they started dating, ostensibly to discuss details, but everyone understood what was involved. And what did the agency think? According to Melissa, the bosses don't care. Rachel brings in good contracts. But the atmosphere has gone bad. Some of the girls think it's wrong to have an affair with a married client. Others are jealous. After all, he's a successful, wealthy man. Laura looked at her watch. Classes would start soon. Thank you for telling me. I really appreciate your honesty. Catherine hugged her impulsively. I'm sorry again. If you need any help, reach out. Melissa can tell you more if you want. Maybe later. Right now I need to get ready for the lecture. The day passed like a blur. Laura lectured, answered students' questions, but her thoughts kept returning to her conversation with Catherine. The picture became clearer and clearer, and that clarity only made it harder. That evening, she reopened Rachel's professional networking page. Now that she knew the context, she noticed new details, photos from corporate events with Mark in the background, comments with ambiguous jokes, likes on all the posts. Her phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. Melissa says Rachel was bragging all day today about how she spent the weekend out of town, and mentioned that her man is finally deciding to make a major life change. With Mark away for another business meeting over the weekend, Laura immersed herself in studying Rachel Clark's social media. She methodically went through profile after profile, saving screenshots and making notes. An interesting picture was emerging. Rachel was clearly trying to create an image of a successful businesswoman, expensive restaurants, fashionable personal growth trainings, photos with famous people of the city. But an attentive eye noticed inconsistencies. Most of the designer clothes in the photo were from last year's collections, probably bought at sales. The car was on credit, a rented apartment in not the most upscale neighborhood. Looking through the comments under Rachel's posts, Laura noticed a recurring pattern. The girl reacted painfully to any hint of her less-than-honorable origins. She diligently copied the manners and lifestyle of wealthy clients, but regularly made small blunders that revealed the lack of a genuine social upbringing. A professional network revealed information about her career path. Rachel started as an administrator in a small restaurant, then worked as an assistant wedding planner, gradually climbing the career ladder. Every 2 to 3 years she changed jobs, moving to larger agencies. Among Rachel's friends on social networks there were several mutual acquaintances. Laura wrote to a former student who now worked at one of the agencies where Rachel used to work. After a few common phrases, the conversation moved smoothly to the topic at hand. "Oh, Rachel? I remember her. Ambitious person. Left us when she didn't get a promotion. They say she left her last place the same way, had a falling out with the management. Critically important was Rachel's page on the site for job search. She did not delete it after employment. Judging by her resume, the girl was actively seeking career opportunities, with salary expectations listed well above market for her level of experience. Rachel's personal blog was full of posts about self-development and female success. There were particularly frequent quotes about "every woman deserves the best" and "never settle for less." In her comments, she often allowed herself to make harsh, almost rude remarks against those who disagreed with her. Of particular interest was the section "My Achievements," where Rachel regularly reported on purchases of status items and acquaintances with the right people. The entries were full of names of well-known people in the city, but a closer look revealed that most of these close acquaintances were limited to formal socializing at work events. Laura mentally pieced together all of Rachel's personality traits. Her thirst for recognition and status was coupled with a painful perception of any criticism. She was constantly trying to appear better than she was, not shying away from going head over heels for career advancement. Prestige was bought with loans. Her own importance was exaggerated at every opportunity, and her attempts to fit into secular society gave away her superficial understanding of the world. By Sunday evening, Laura had compiled an impressive dossier. She realized that she was dealing with someone whose self-esteem depended entirely on external recognition. Rachel desperately wanted to enter high society, but had neither the means nor a genuine upbringing to do so. She compensated by aggressive self-presentation and attempts to buy status through expensive clothes and connections with wealthy men. Comparing the dates of the posts and the events of the past few months, Laura realized that the ring had been given to charity for a reason. It was a way to gain recognition in high society, to create the image of a generous benefactress. Rachel clearly didn't understand the true value of the family heirloom. To her, it was just a beautiful thing that could be used to enhance her own status. Suddenly, Laura realized that for the first time in a long time she felt not hurt or anger, but something akin to cold, exploratory interest. As a teacher, she was used to analyzing information, identifying patterns, finding weaknesses. And now, those skills could come in handy in a very different area. After carefully analyzing Rachel's personality, Laura began to develop a plan of action. Her office at the college became a kind of headquarters. Here, she spent most of the time between lectures, building a complex scheme of future actions. The academic world, like any other, rested on connections and reputation. Over the years of teaching, Laura had built up a vast network of contacts. Her former students now worked in a variety of fields, from journalism to event management. Many of them warmly remembered their teacher who had helped them at the start of their careers. Laura's first contact was with Jane Porter, a former student who was now head of culture at the City Journal. After exchanging pleasantries, the conversation turned to the upcoming charity auction. "You know, Jane, I'd like to write a series of articles about ethics in today's art and charity world, about how some people use good deeds for self-parody, maybe even do some interviews with event organizers." Jane was interested in the idea. They agreed on a series of publications where Laura would act as an expert. The first article was to address the topic of authenticity in charity, when good deeds become just a tool to move up the social ladder. The next step was a conversation with Alexander Woods, curator of the City Gallery. He was just preparing an exhibition on family heirlooms and their role in modern society. Laura suggested supplementing the exhibit with an educational program. "Can you imagine? We could talk about how important it is to preserve family values, how some things carry not only material but also deep personal history, and vice versa, how that history is devalued when heirlooms are misused." At the same time, Laura began attending events organized by the agency where Rachel worked. She didn't try to meet her in person. It was too early. Instead, she carefully observed, memorized details, got acquainted with the right people. On one such evening, she struck up a conversation with Margaret Stone, an influential lady who was on the board of trustees of several charitable foundations. Laura carefully steered the conversation in the right direction, about the importance of choosing the right organizers for serious events. You see, Margaret, there are so many people nowadays who see charity as a way to get into high society. They don't realize the true value of tradition and family heirlooms. It's just a tool for them. Margaret nodded in agreement, and Laura realized she had hit on the right string. The old lady herself came from an old family and was sensitive to matters of tradition. In college, Laura began preparing a special course of lectures on ethics in modern society. She carefully selected examples that indirectly pointed to the situation with the ring, but did not name names. This was to create a certain public opinion, to prepare the ground. Social media was an important part of the plan. Laura asked her former PR students to help spread certain stories and opinions. They were to appear in the right places at the right time, creating a wave of discussion about ethical issues in the charity. Each step was carefully considered. Laura was not going to act directly. That would have been too obvious and ineffective. Instead, she was preparing a complex combination where every element had to work at the right moment. She realized that Rachel's reputation was everything. That's why the attack had to be directed not at her work or her relationship with Mark, but at her position in society, which she so desperately sought. A situation had to be created where Rachel's every action would work against her. In her office, Laura had put together a small whiteboard where she hung pictures and notes. It was as if she were preparing for an important lecture, only the subject was not art history but the life of a particular person. On the table was an old photograph of Elizabeth's great-grandmother. Laura had found a copy of it in the family archives. The snapshot reminded her of what she was all about. Monica Baker's visit to the college seemed perfectly natural. A former student came to see her favorite teacher. Monica was now a senior account manager at one of the largest event agencies in the city. She and Laura met at a small cafe near the college. "Remember how you helped me with my first interview?" Monica stirred her coffee. "Your recommendations opened the doors to my profession. Without you, I never would have gotten into the industry." Laura smiled. She had really helped Monica then. The girl was talented but lacked confidence. A little push in the right direction had changed her life. "You had everything you needed to succeed. I just gave you a little guidance. By the way, how are things going at the agency? I hear you have a lot of interesting projects." "Yes, there is enough work. We're preparing some big events now. You know, in our field, reputation is everything. One bad project can wipe out years of work." Laura took a sip of coffee. "Indeed. I heard about a nasty story about a charity auction. It seems the organizer didn't behave quite ethically." Monica pitched forward. "You mean the ring story? We heard the rumors, too. To be honest, we were shocked. How can a charity be used for self-parody?" "Tell me more about it." Laura tried to speak casually, as if it were some insignificant piece of gossip. "Well, this Rachel Clark. She's known in the industry as a person who doesn't shy away from any method. They say she stole several clients from her former employers, and now this donation thing." The conversation moved smoothly to a discussion of professional ethics. Monica told about cases when the organizer's misbehavior ruined the reputation of the whole event. Laura listened attentively, occasionally asking leading questions. "You know, Monica, as a teacher, I am very concerned about such cases. We teach students professional ethics, and then they encounter this kind of behavior in real life. Maybe we should talk about this publicly. We have a conference for young professionals coming up. It would be useful to discuss such examples, without mentioning names, of course." Laura nodded thoughtfully. That's a good idea. By the way, who else will be at the conference? Representatives from all the major agencies in the city. It's an important industry event. Everyone's looking out for reputation. By the end of the meeting, a plan of action had formed itself. Monica was to share the story with her colleagues, simply as an example of unethical behavior in the profession. Knowing the workings of the industry, Laura realized that such information would quickly spread throughout the agencies. The next day, Monica sent a message. She had discussed the situation with several influential colleagues. All of them were outraged at the use of charity for personal gain. They were particularly hurt that the donated item could have been obtained dishonestly. A week later, Laura met with Monica again. Now talk of Rachel Clark's questionable ethics was going around in every major agency in the city. No one was making direct accusations, but the atmosphere around her was becoming increasingly tense. "You know what the most interesting thing is?" recounted Monica. "She's fueling these conversations herself, trying to justify herself, proving to everyone that she had the right to dispose of the ring. And that only increases suspicion." Laura listened carefully to the news. The plan was working even better than she had expected. In a world where everything was built on reputation and connections, such talk was scarier than any direct accusations. "By the way," Monica added before leaving, "our agency is planning a big fundraiser. Would you mind speaking as an expert on ethics in today's society? I think it would be very interesting for all involved." The first bell rang when a well-known charity canceled its contract with the agency to host the annual ball. The official reason sounded streamlined: mismatch of views on the organization of the event. But it was whispered behind the scenes that representatives of the foundation did not want to work with an agency whose employee was involved in a scandalous story with a donated ring. Laura learned this from Margaret Stone, who called her to discuss an upcoming lecture on ethics in modern society. "Can you believe it, dear? This person had the nerve to come to a meeting with the board of trustees and talk about charity. After all we've heard about her." Through her former students, Laura followed the developments closely. Rumors spread like circles on water, first among the professional community, then among the clients. No one made direct accusations, but doubts about Rachel's reputation grew stronger. The next blow was dealt by the wife of a large industrialist, who refused the agency's services in organizing her anniversary. She bluntly told the management that she did not want to deal with a manager who used charity to move up the social ladder. The agency began to grumble. Rachel was still one of the top managers, but her colleagues were trying to stay away from her. No one wanted the shadow of her reputation to fall on their projects. Jane Porter, a former student of Laura's from City magazine, published an article on the ethical problems in modern philanthropy. No names were mentioned, but all the examples transparently hinted at recent events. The article sparked a heated discussion on social media. Laura was watching from the sidelines. She purposely kept in the shadows, letting events unfold naturally. Only sometimes, like an experienced conductor, she made subtle movements, directing public opinion in the right direction. At yet another charity event, Rachel tried to strike up a conversation with a few potential clients, but she was politely avoided. The socialite society she had longed to be a part of now treated her with ill-concealed contempt. The director of the agency, concerned about the drop in bookings, summoned Rachel for a serious talk. She was urged to rectify the situation and restore her reputation. But no one knew how to do it. In a world where everything is built on trust and connections, it's almost impossible to repair a damaged reputation. Mark, too, was beginning to show signs of concern. His position in the investment company depended heavily on his connections with influential clients, and the scandal surrounding Rachel could damage his reputation. One morning, Laura received a message from Monica. Can you believe she tried to organize her own charity event to rehabilitate herself, but none of the serious sponsors wanted to deal with her? Rachel was flailing around trying to save the day. She wrote exculpatory posts on social media, tried to meet with disgruntled clients in person, even offered to work with minimal commission. But every action she took only made the situation worse. At a conference for young professionals, where Laura gave a lecture on ethics, the story with the ring was discussed as an example of how not to behave in the professional community. Rachel did not attend the event. She was not invited. By the end of the month, the situation had become critical. 3 major clients broke contracts with the agency, directly pointing out the reputational risks. The management was faced with a difficult choice: to lose a valuable manager or to continue losing clients. Laura just waited, realizing that the system would work itself out. In a world where reputation is the main currency, Rachel had made an irreparable mistake, and now she had to face the consequences of her actions. In early October, the agency lost a contract to organize pre-Christmas events for the mall. The client they had been working with for 3 years in a row suddenly preferred a lesser-known but more ethically impeccable agency. For Rachel, this meant the loss of a significant portion of her annual income. She was used to living on commissions from big projects, not really thinking about savings. Now her financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. Mark answered her calls less and less often. When she met him, he seemed distracted and worried, constantly glancing at his watch. One day she overheard him talking to a colleague. "No, I cannot invite her to the corporate party. You realize the reputational risks." At the agency, Rachel found herself increasingly left out of important projects. Clients politely but firmly asked for another manager. Her desk, once cluttered with documents and event plans, was now empty. The bank sent another reminder about a car loan payment. Rachel put the letter aside. There was no money. She had already missed one payment, the first time she had ever missed a payment. Her spotless credit history was in jeopardy. At yet another social event she'd attended in hopes of making new contacts, Rachel found herself almost completely isolated. People who had recently greeted her with cheers were now limited to cold nods. She stood at the column for almost an hour, clutching her champagne glass frantically, until she finally left without speaking to anyone. At home, the rent bill and a notice of rent increase were waiting for her. Rachel opened her laptop, checking her account balance. The numbers weren't encouraging. Her savings were melting away at an alarming rate. She tried to meet Mark for dinner, but he'd talked himself out of a work emergency. There was a new note in his voice, as if talking to her had become an onerous responsibility. That evening, surfing social media, Rachel came across photos from a charity event where she'd once posed with that very ring. Comments under the post were disabled, but she knew why: too much negative feedback. At work, the CFO called her in. The conversation was short. Due to the decreasing number of projects, her percentage of deals was being revised downward. In effect, this meant cutting her income almost in half. Mark increasingly spent his evenings at business meetings where she was no longer invited. One day, she decided to surprise him and arrived at his office with lunch. The receptionist politely informed her that Mr. Reynolds was busy and wouldn't be able to see her. At home, Rachel went through her closet, figuring out what she could sell. The designer clothes she'd bought on credit now seemed a mockery of her current situation, as did the status car, for which she still owed the bank an impressive sum. The next day, she tried to negotiate with the bank to restructure the loan. The manager was polite but adamant. Her current income didn't allow for favorable terms. Mark canceled their traditional Sunday brunch, citing an urgent meeting with investors. Rachel knew it was a lie. She'd seen pictures on social media from the country club where he'd played golf with co-workers. In the evening, she sat on the balcony of her rented apartment for a long time, looking out over the city. Everything she'd built over the last few years, her career, her relationships, her reputation, was crumbling like a house of cards. And the worst part was that she didn't understand how to stop it. At the agency, her desk had been moved to the far corner of the office. Now she was taking on small projects that no one else wanted to take on. Her stellar days as lead manager were a thing of the past. Mark had stopped responding to messages. His last, "Sorry, really busy right now," had been hanging unread for days. Rachel realized he was growing distant, but she couldn't do anything about it. The meeting with the agency management was scheduled for Monday morning. Rachel knew in advance what it would be about. Rumors of her termination had been floating around the office for weeks. She put on her best suit like armor, even though she knew it wouldn't make a difference. The director looked almost guilty. He talked at length about the difficult market situation, about the need for optimization, about how much he valued her professionalism. But the bottom line remained the same. The agency could no longer afford an employee with a tarnished reputation. It took only 15 minutes to pack her things. A few photos, a day planner, a favorite cup. Her co-workers carefully pretended to be busy with their work, avoiding looking in her direction. Only Sarah from HR silently helped her pack her personal belongings into a cardboard box. The next day, Rachel sent out resumes to other agencies in the city. She was sure that with her experience and connections, it wouldn't be hard to find a new job. The first rejections didn't discourage her. After all, the market was really tough. After a week, she realized something was wrong. Her resume seemed to hit an invisible wall: polite responses, formal rejections, silence. At one point, she was told bluntly, "I'm sorry, but we can't risk client relationships." Rachel tried to use old connections. She called everyone she knew in the industry, wrote to former colleagues, tried to arrange meetings. Most didn't even return her messages. Those who did agree to meet were limited to generalities and promises to keep in mind. In desperation, she turned to a small agency on the outskirts of the city. Their specialty was children's parties and weddings, far from the level to which she was accustomed. But even there she was turned down, citing inconsistency with the corporate culture. At home, Rachel spent long hours in front of her laptop, browsing job search sites. She tried to find something outside the event industry, but everywhere required experience, which she didn't have, and her skills as an event organizer went untapped without the right connections. One day, she accidentally met her former client in a cafe. She pretended not to recognize her, although a couple of months ago they had been discussing the details of a grand anniversary over a glass of expensive wine. The situation was getting desperate. Her savings were running low, and there were no new sources of income. Rachel began to think about moving to another city, but she realized that news travels fast in professional circles. To top it all off, she learned that her former agency had been awarded a major contract to organize a series of events, the very same events she had started to prepare. The project was handed over to a young employee, a recent college graduate. Every morning, Rachel scoured agency websites trying to find any opportunity. She was ready to start as a junior manager, willing to accept minimum wage. But the doors remained closed. In professional social media groups, her posts began to be ignored. Former colleagues deleted her from their friends. Invitations to industry events stopped coming. It was as if she had become invisible in a world she had recently considered her own. In the evenings, Rachel sat on the balcony of her rented apartment, realizing that soon she wouldn't even be able to pay her rent. The city below lived its life. Events were taking place. Contracts were being signed. Careers were being built. But now, she was just a bystander. The last straw was a message from a recruiting agency specializing in the event industry. They politely asked her not to send them any more resumes, as they cannot recommend her to potential employers. Rachel finally realized this wasn't a temporary hardship. This was the end of her career in the industry. She had destroyed her reputation, and now she had to find a way to live with it. Mark set up a meeting at the same cafe where they usually had lunch on Thursdays. Only now it wasn't at lunchtime but in the evening when there were very few customers. Rachel realized the significance of that choice as soon as she saw his face. He spoke softly, avoiding looking her in the eye, about how they needed to stop seeing each other, that his position in the company was in jeopardy. Customers were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. That his wife. At the mention of Laura, he stammered for the first time. "I'm sorry, but it's what's best for everyone." The phrase sounded especially false in the empty cafe. Rachel sat mechanically stirring her long, cold coffee. She suddenly realized that she didn't even feel pain or resentment, only fatigue and a strange numbness. It was as if the last pillar in her crumbling life had disappeared so expectantly that it evoked no emotion. At home, she opened her laptop and began reviewing the events of the past few months. It had all started after that charity auction. No, earlier, after she'd taken the ring from the Reynolds house. It had been an impulsive act. She'd wanted to do something significant to show everyone that she was worthy of being part of high society. Now, looking back, she saw how one decision had set off a chain of events. Magazine articles, conversations in professional circles, canceled contracts. Everything added up to a single picture. Someone was methodically and very professionally destroying her reputation. Rachel started checking the dates of publications and events. The first article on ethics in philanthropy appeared shortly after the auction. Then there was a series of college lectures, an exhibit on family heirlooms, a conference for young professionals. Behind each event, she felt someone's guiding hand. She recalled the names of people associated with these events. Many of them were alumni of the college where Laura Reynolds taught. Some still kept in touch with their former instructor. A conversation with Mark about the ring came to mind. He had mentioned in passing then that it was a family heirloom that had belonged to Laura's great-grandmother. Rachel hadn't thought much of it at the time. It seemed to her that a thing lying idle in a desk drawer couldn't be of much value. She opened the article about the family heirlooms exhibit. The picture showed Laura Reynolds standing next to the curator, talking about the importance of preserving family traditions. Her face was calm and centered the face of someone in complete control. Rachel suddenly realized that in all this time they had never once met in person. Laura hadn't tried to create a scandal, demanded an explanation, or made public accusations. Instead, she had used her connections and reputation to methodically destroy the career of her husband's mistress. The phone rang. The bank was reminding her of an overdue car payment. Rachel mechanically replied that she would pay next week, even though she realized that the money was not and would not be forthcoming. Hanging up the phone, she stared at Laura's picture again. Everything seemed so obvious now. Every action she took, attempting to justify herself, to prove herself, to maintain her position in society, was only making things worse. She had fallen into a perfectly constructed trap where she had become the instrument of her own downfall. Mark sent a message, short and formal, saying that all her belongings left at his office would be sent by courier. Rachel deleted the message without replying. She suddenly realized that he too had been part of the plan. His gradual estrangement, his growing coldness, the final breakup. Evening light poured in through the window, coloring the room with warm tones. Rachel sat at her laptop, looking through the photos from that very charity auction. She, radiant and confident, showing off the ring to the photographers. The ring that was the beginning of the end. Laura was checking student papers when there was a knock on her office door. She looked up and froze. Rachel Clark was standing on the doorstep. Without makeup, in simple clothes, she looked very different than she did at social events. "May I come in?" Rachel's voice sounded uncertain. Laura nodded silently, indicating the chair across from her desk. For a few moments they stared at each other, two women whose lives appeared so strangely intertwined. "I know it's you," Rachel finally said. "All this time it's been you. The articles, the exhibitions, the talks. You've methodically destroyed my reputation." Laura set her pen aside. "And didn't you start that process when you stole and auctioned off someone else's family heirloom?" "EA, I didn't think it was that important. It was just a beautiful old ring that was sitting in a desk drawer. I wanted to do something meaningful to show everyone." "Show what exactly? That you can control other people's valuables? That you're willing to use charity for self-parody?" Rachel lowered her eyes. "I was stupid and arrogant. Thought only of myself, of my status. Now I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my relationships. What did you expect? That you could invade other people's lives with impunity, steal family heirlooms, destroy marriages?" "I came to apologize." Rachel looked up. "Not to ask for forgiveness. I realize I don't deserve it. Just to say that I realize my guilt and I'm sorry for what I've done." Laura looked carefully at the woman sitting before her. There was nothing left of the self-assured person who posed with someone else's ring in front of the cameras. "You know what the best part is?" Laura asked. "You didn't even try to find out the history of the ring. To you, it was just a pretty thing to use. And yet there was a whole life behind it. My great-grandmother's, my family's. I realize that now. Too late, but I do." "And what are you going to do next?" Rachel grinned bitterly. "What can I do? There's no more work for me in this town. No one will want to deal with a man with a tainted reputation. That's how our world works, isn't it? Reputations and connections, the things you were so proud of, turned against you." "I deserved it," Rachel said quietly. "Every rejection, every acquaintance turned away, every unanswered phone call is payback for my actions." There was a pause. Outside the window, a normal school day was buzzing. The voices of students, footsteps in the hallway, the distant call to lecture. "A West Coast collector has the ring," Rachel said suddenly. "I can give you his contacts. Might be able to buy it back." "I already know where the ring is," Laura interrupted her. "And don't worry, it'll go back to the family. But your reputation, I'm afraid it's an irretrievable loss." Rachel stood up. "I understand. Again, I'm sorry for everything. You really are a very smart woman. I didn't even notice how I fell into that trap." "It's not a trap," Laura shook her head. "It's just the consequences of your own actions." At the door, Rachel turned around. "You know what the worst part is? I really thought I was doing the right thing, didn't I? That I was doing the right thing by donating the ring to charity. How naive I was." "Not naive," Laura countered. "Just too presumptuous. And it cost you everything." After Rachel's visit, Laura intensified her search for the ring. She had long known the collector's name, Howard Sterling, a well-known antique jewelry collector from San Francisco. Laura had learned about him at the beginning of her investigation, but she had been waiting for the right moment. The first call she made was to Alexander Woods, the curator of the City Gallery. He had extensive connections in the antiques and art world. After hearing the story, Alexander shook his head thoughtfully. "Sterling? Yes, I know him. A complicated man, obsessed with his collection. He wouldn't just part with the ring, even if he knew its history." But Laura had a trump card up her sleeve. While preparing an exhibit on family heirlooms, she discovered old programs from Elizabeth's great-grandmother's performances in the college archives. On one of them was a rare photo, the singer in full stage costume with that very ring on her hand. "I think he might be interested in this." Laura held out a file folder to Alexander. "The photo has never been published, and Sterling, as far as I know, collects not only jewelry, but also the stories associated with it." Alexander studied the materials. "Yeah, that could work. I have an exhibit in San Francisco just about to go up. I could arrange a meeting." The next 2 weeks were spent preparing. Laura gathered all the documents to prove the ring's provenance. She contacted several music archives, obtaining copies of playbills and reviews of her great-grandmother's performances. The story of the ring grew in detail. The meeting with Sterling took place at his private gallery. A gray-haired man with a keen eye scrutinized the documents he had brought. He was particularly interested in an unpublished photograph. "Funny," he said at last. "When I bought this ring at the auction, it was just a beautiful piece of antique jewelry. And now it turns out it has such a rich history." Laura waited silently. She knew she couldn't rush the collector. "You know, I sensed right away that there was something wrong with this acquisition," Sterling continued. "It was put up for sale too hastily. Too little information was given. Usually, these things have a more detailed history." He walked over to a small safe built into the wall. A moment later, the ring lay on a velvet cushion between them. "How much do you want for it?" Laura asked. Sterling smiled. "It's not about the money. I'm a collector. I'm interested in unique pieces and their stories. I propose a trade, a ring in exchange for these documents and your help in organizing the exhibition. I think the story of the opera singer and her ring will interest the public." Laura agreed without hesitation. They talked for several more hours, discussing the details of the future exhibition. Sterling proved to be a keen conversationalist, genuinely interested in the stories of his exhibits. When she left the gallery, the ring was habitually in a small velvet box in her bag. The sun was setting, coloring the streets of San Francisco with golden hues. On the airplane, Laura took out the ring and examined it closely. It hadn't changed, the same sleek platinum setting, the same petal pattern, the same flawless diamond. But now another chapter had been added to its story, the story of how it had come home. At home, she put the ring in an old jewelry box, now stored not in a desk drawer but in a safe. Next to it lay the same unpublished photograph of her great-grandmother, a copy she had given to Sterling. The original was still in her possession. The history of the ring was not over. There was an exhibition ahead, new research, new discoveries. But the main thing was done. The family heirloom was back where it belonged. That evening, Laura sat in her study for a long time, going through old photographs. In one of them, Elizabeth's great-grandmother was smiling for the camera, the ring on her hand gleaming in the spotlight. Now that smile seemed a little conspiratorial to Laura, as if the great-grandmother knew that one day her ring would be the center of such a story. That evening, Laura waited for Mark at home. There were 2 cups of tea on the table, and the scent of fresh baked goods in the air. She'd baked his favorite blueberry pie on purpose. Everything had to look casual, homely. Mark entered the kitchen warily. He had grown accustomed to his wife's silent aloofness, and now clearly didn't understand what this sudden change meant. "Sit down," Laura pointed to a chair. "We need to talk." He sat down, avoiding looking her in the eye. On the table between them lay a velvet box containing a ring. "I returned it," Laura said calmly. "It took some time and effort, but the family heirloom is home again." Mark was silent, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "You know what the best part is?" she continued. "All this time I wasn't so much thinking about your cheating as I was thinking about how you could have let her take the ring. I mean, you knew its history, knew what it meant to me and my family." "I didn't know she took it," he finally uttered. "I swear I only found out when I saw the auction pictures." "And what did you do when you found out?" Mark lowered his head. "Nothing. I got scared of the scandal." Laura sipped her tea. "Of course you were scared. You're always afraid of scandal, of unpleasant conversations, of difficult decisions. That's why you let others decide for you. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to make a choice. Not because circumstances forced you to, not because your reputation is at stake, but because you want to." Mark looked up. "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice." Laura put her hand on the ring box. "We can get a divorce, quietly, without scandal, keeping up appearances. Or we can try to start over, but on my terms." "What terms?" "First, you change jobs. I don't want you going to an office every day where everyone knows you're involved with Rachel. Second, we'll start seeing a marriage counselor. We both need to get to the bottom of what happened. And third, no lies. Never again. Mark wondered. What if I don't agree? Then divorce. And believe me, I've made sure I have all the trumps on my hands. You know how to be methodical and efficient, she smiled, and there was something in that smile that made him shiver. You planned all of this? The story with Rachel, her firing, the loss of reputation? I simply created the conditions in which her own actions led to a natural outcome. So you decide, are you ready for new conditions or would you prefer a clean break? Mark was silent for a long time, looking into his cup. Then he said quietly, I'm willing to give it a try. I agree with the terms. Laura nodded. Good. I'll send you the psychologist contacts tomorrow and start looking for a new job. You've got a month to do that. What about trust? After everything that's happened? Trust has to be earned all over again, she interrupted. I'm not promising it will be easy, but I'm giving you a chance, a one-time chance. Don't miss it. They finished their tea in silence. Outside the window, dusk was fading and the windows were lit up in the neighboring house. An ordinary evening, only now it was different. They both realized it. Can I see the ring? Asked Mark suddenly. Laura shook her head. No, not yet, no. Maybe sometime later when you've proven yourself worthy of being a part of this family's history. He nodded understandingly and got up from the table. On the threshold of the kitchen, he turned around. Thank you for the chance, and for not causing a scandal. I don't make scandals, Laura replied. I'm a problem solver, and I hope you won't be one of them again. The exhibition in the city gallery was coming to an end. The last visitors were leisurely perusing the display of family heirlooms. In the central showcase glittered an ancient ring, no longer just a piece of jewelry, but an exhibit with a rich history. Laura stood at the window of her college office, watching the falling fall leaves. A lot had changed in the past year. Mark had indeed changed jobs. He was now in private equity, working mostly from home. Weekly sessions with a psychologist gradually helped them build a new relationship, based not on habit but on conscious choice. A few days ago, Laura accidentally met Rachel's former colleague at the supermarket. She told her that Rachel had moved to a small town on the West Coast where she got a job as an administrator at the local cultural center. She is said to have completely changed her lifestyle. No glossy facade, just honest work and a gradual restoration of self-respect. Mark no longer wore expensive suits or attended social gatherings. His new job brought less money but more freedom and peace of mind. Every night he and Laura had dinner together, discussing the day's events. Sometimes the conversation didn't go well, sometimes painful memories came up, but they learned to deal with it. Alexander Woods organized a series of lectures on the history of family heirlooms. Elizabeth's ring became one of the centerpieces. Laura occasionally gave a talk about her great-grandmother but never mentioned recent events. That part of the story was left behind. Monica had been promoted in her agency and was now in charge of organizing major events herself. She often consulted with Laura, especially when it came to the ethical aspects of the job. Rachel's story became an unspoken lesson to everyone in the industry. In professional circles, the events of a year ago were gradually forgotten, becoming an urban legend. No one knew all the details, but everyone remembered the main lesson. Reputation and trust are priceless and should not be traded for fleeting gains. Jane Porter wrote a series of articles about the transformation of philanthropy in modern society. Between the lines was a story about the importance of preserving true values in a world where everyone is trying to create a pretty picture. The ring was now kept in a special safe. Laura took it out only on special occasions, for exhibitions or family celebrations. She realized that its value was not in its material value, but in the history it held. And now that history was even richer. Mark was gradually changing. His eyes no longer held the insecurity that made him seek validation of his worth on the side. He was learning to accept himself and his decisions without looking back at other people's expectations. Laura had changed too. She realized that power doesn't always manifest itself in loud words and decisive actions. Sometimes, all it takes is to create an environment where people will come to the right conclusions on their own. Howard Sterling sent her regular letters telling her about new finds for his collection. They maintained a professional relationship based on mutual respect and understanding of the value of historical memory. On the last day of the exhibition, Laura stood for a long time at the display case with the ring. The information plaque had a brief history of the jewelry, from Elizabeth's first performance at the Metropolitan Opera to the present day. The last line read, "Family heirlooms preserve not only the memory of the past, but also teach us to appreciate the present." That evening, Mark picked up the ring for the first time in a year. He looked at it for a long time, as if seeing it for the first time, and then said quietly, "I understand now. I understand why it's so important." Laura smiled. They both knew there was still a lot of work ahead, a lot of talking and perhaps difficult moments. But the main thing was done. They had learned to appreciate what was really important.